All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your presence here as I finish my tenure as chair of the CPC, and I get to introduce you to the new leadership of the Progressive Caucus, a truly stellar group of leaders who are going to move us forward in the next term. The CPC has been my ideological home in Congress and always will be, and it's been a real honor to lead it and to grow it substantially over the 6 years that I've been first co-chair and then chair. Just imagine our co-founder, Bernie Sanders, used to say that the CPC was a place where a few people came to complain. Even 6 years ago, the CPC was significantly smaller and at that time had just one full-time staff person. Today, thanks to our investments and our reforms, we have grown the caucus to almost 100 members, and we've quadrupled our staff capacity. And I want to give a special thank you to all of our members, as well as to our truly excellent staff members who have been working so tirelessly and will continue to in the next Congress. The CPC remains the most diverse caucus in Congress, with our members representing all of the ethnic caucuses, as well as a host of professions before they came to Congress, from organizers to teachers, lawyers to engineers, union workers to social workers, and small business owners. And we're united by our deep shared commitment to standing up for opportunity, equality, and justice for the vast majority of Americans who have been left out and left behind. I want to especially thank the previous chairs, including Bernie Sanders, also my mentor and friend, and the first woman of color to serve as a co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, Barbara Lee, who's with us, and also Lynn Woolsey, who is her co-chair, Raul Grijalva and Keith Ellison, and of course Mark Pocan. Since our founding back in 1991, CPC has always been on the front lines of every fight for justice, with our core economic agenda at the center, an agenda that has always been and will always be deeply intertwined with racial justice and gender justice. The CPC was the first to call for a $15 minimum wage. We successfully advocated the Obama and Biden administrations to raise the wages of federal contract workers and passed amendments on the House floor that would strip federal contracts from employers who violate workplace rights and safety. We ensured that the House voted to pass paid sick leave for rail workers. We have been leading champions of the PRO Act, the Medicare for All Act, college, pre-K, and child care for all, ensuring housing is a human right, and so many other issues. And regularly, you will find CPC members on picket lines everywhere across the country, standing up for workers. And of course, the biggest pieces of legislation of the 118th Congress, from the Infrastructure Bill to the Inflation Reduction Act to the CHIPS and Science Act provisions that prevented corporations from engaging in stock buybacks, and much, much more, were all thanks to the leverage of the CPC members who stuck together and demanded more over and over again. We're in this fight to fix wealth and income inequality, to rebuild our economy so that it works for working people, and to give poor and working people across our country hope. Hope that they can afford groceries. Hope that they can fight the biggest corporate monopolies that are driving out small businesses. Hope that they can simply leave a little something for the next generation. And that's why, despite our losses in November, we still see a clear path forward. On offense, we have to rebuild our party and focus on making sure that the economic gains don't just go to the wealthiest, as they have for the last 30 years, but rather lift up workers who haven't seen their real wages increase in that 30-year period. We have to lay out the vision for affordable housing and universal child care, the two biggest inflationary costs that families are dealing with right now, that progressives did address here in the House with Build Back Better, but was blocked by two conservative Democrats in the Senate. And we have to have a laser focus on showing people clearly how their lives will be materially different when they wake up in the morning and think about their family's future. On defense, we'll do what progressives have always done and lead the fights to stop the worst of the incoming Trump administration, focus on the deep unpopularity of Trump's tax scam 2.0, and stop efforts to cut Social Security, Medicare, and other benefits. And of course, all the way to protect our most vulnerable communities of folks of color, immigrants, poor people, LGBTQ, and women that will always be targeted. I've always said that being progressive, when I'm asked what it means, just means that you are the first to the best and most just idea. You've heard me say it many times in this room, and other people then run to catch up and claim it as their own. We've seen that time and time again with red states in this past election, raising the minimum wage or offering paid leave on the ballot or ensuring abortion access. And if politics is the art of the possible, then it is progressives at the Progressive Caucus and outside of Congress who push the boundaries of what is seen as possible, because the possible is never static. It is only what you make it to be when you organize. So today it is my great honor to introduce you to the next unanimously elected leadership for the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the next term, an incredible group of members. Chair-elect Greg Casar, who represents the great state of Texas, will be the first ever chair from a Republican-dominated state. Chair-elect Casar dove right into the CPC in his first term, did an amazing job serving as whip, exhibited his commitment to the caucus with both leadership roles in the CPC and the CPC PAC, and brought incredible organizing experience from his previous government service to building power for workers and immigrants, as well as many new ideas that I know he's going to implement as the next chair. Deputy Chair Ilhan Omar from the great state of Minnesota, there she is, who will continue to serve in this role, also has provided amazing service to the CPC for 2 terms as whip, and then this last term as deputy chair, and will serve in that position again, has been such a brave champion for working people and for human rights around the world. And we're so thrilled that she'll continue to serve. And my good friend and the whip-elect, Chuy Garcia from Illinois, another revered and experienced progressive organizer, coalition builder, and labor movement ally his whole life and here in Congress. I'm going to be cheering these 3 new leaders on as I transition to Chair Emerita, and my heart is very, very full knowing that we have these amazing people in leadership. So now please join me in welcoming our chair-elect of the Progressive Caucus, Greg Casar.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Jayapal. Our entire caucus and the entire country really owe you an enormous debt for what you've accomplished for working people, for what you fought for. There are so many Americans that their city didn't go bankrupt, their family didn't lose their house, their grandmother or grandfather didn't get deported. They were able to keep a roof over their heads because of work that you did that people may never know that you did. And you did it because you love people, and we see that every single day. We're so grateful to you. To the colleagues who gave me their vote and their confidence, thank you. I'm honored to follow in the footsteps of giants like Senator Bernie Sanders, like Chairwoman Jayapal, Mark Pocan, Raul Grijalva, Keith Ellison, Barbara Lee, Lynn Woolsey, and so many others. And, you know, even though I'm the first person that represents a Republican-dominated state, Barbara Lee is a Texan herself, and so, you know, maybe I'm the second. I'm stepping into this leadership role alongside so many champions for working people who were also just unanimously elected at our caucus meeting. Deputy Chair-elect Omar, Whip-elect Garcia, and our new vice chairs, Representative Ro Khanna, Delio Ramirez, Mark Takano, Rashida Tlaib, who's also here with us today, Latifah Simon, Jared Huffman, Maxwell Frost, Lloyd Doggett, Morgan McGarvey. And Morgan and Delia, of course, are here with us as well. And how could I forget Jan Schakowsky? Like Congresswoman Jayapal, I also come from an organizing background, and I think that's why we became such quick friends and co-conspirators. Pramila was one of the first to truly wield her grassroots organizing talents to build progressive power, not just inside the walls of the Capitol, but outside of it. And she has provided a model for me and so many others who will lead the Progressive Caucus in the future. Pramila was chair and the sole chair of this caucus during the last Trump administration, and she wasted no time in strengthening this caucus, in implementing new bylaws, which is tough to do in any organization, but those bylaws brought our caucus together, made the investments so that we could have the staff and the communications and the organization. Pramila showed us that while running for office is like an individual sport, governing requires being part of a team sport. And she was our team captain. She held people together and brought Build Back Better to the floor. She made sure that we actually had the elements that eventually became things like the Inflation Reduction Act. She built our block voting strategy that grew our caucuses, not only our caucuses numbers, but also our caucuses influence to fight for working people. She also helped create critical infrastructure for our team and brought us the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center, as well as a political action committee, the Progressive Caucus PAC. That's a lot. That's a lot for a person to do. Thank you so much for that. And those efforts had an impact. It was the Progressive Caucus working with those groups that held the line over and over, that brought Build Back Better through the House and brought us the Inflation Reduction Act, which had the biggest climate investments in American history, as well as price negotiation for critical medicines and drugs, and a huge victory for the people over Big Pharma. It was the Progressive Caucus that helped influence and pass the landmark American Rescue Plan, and it was the Progressive Caucus that laid the foundation for the Biden-Harris administration's executive action agenda. It was because of the Progressive Caucus members and their leadership that we had the cancellation of over $167 billion in student debt. We had guaranteed overtime for millions more American workers being put into effect by the Biden administration. The Biden administration established an Office of Gun Violence Prevention because of the advocacy of our caucus and our members. None of this would have happened not only without the Progressive Caucus, but also without Chairwoman Jayapal's leadership. In fact, I believe that if the Democratic Party, and this is a little off my script, if the Democratic Party was a little bit more like Chairwoman Jayapal and a little less like Joe Manchin, I think we would have won this election. I think we would have won this election. Because I hear pundit after pundit talking about how the Democratic Party should focus more on wages, housing, and childcare. Well, guess what? It was the Progressive Caucus that brought to the floor, over our own party's opposition at times, wages, housing, and childcare. And if we had passed wages, housing, and childcare because they were progressive priorities, I think that working people would have showed up to the polls in much greater numbers. And that is exactly what the Progressive Caucus has to stay focused on. Because we lost a general election that we should have won. Our party has a tough road ahead. And I want to make it clear. The members of the Progressive Caucus are those who are best prepared to reform the Democratic Party. It is Progressive Caucus members who know how to stand up to CEOs who make more and more money while they pay their workers less and less. It is Progressive Caucus members who have the experience of standing up to special interest groups who spend millions of dollars to influence our elections. It is Progressive Caucus members who know how to stand for peace. It is Progressive Caucus members who stand up to bullies and fraudsters and the cheats who try to scapegoat our communities. Trump's entire campaign was built on nothing but lies, and it is Progressive Caucus members who are unbought and unbossed truth tellers. The GOP campaigned and won on a propaganda-fueled lie to the American people. They said over and over and over again that it was immigrants or people of color or trans people or whoever that were to blame for our economic problems. But the Progressive Caucus clearly says it wasn't a trans person who denied your health insurance claim. It was a giant health insurance company that has gone unregulated by the Republican majority. It was not an asylum seeker that raised your rent. It was a Wall Street hedge fund that did, just like the Wall Street hedge funds CEOs that Trump is trying to fill his cabinet up with. The truth is the GOP doesn't give a damn about working people. They just pretend to. They distract us with bigoted culture war propaganda while they pick the pockets of hardworking Americans. But it's those hardworking Americans that we have to fully bring back into the fold, not just of the Democratic Party, but back into the fold of engaging in our politics. For decades, working class people and the entire country associated the Democratic Party with standing up for working class people. That started to change during the Tea Party wave in this country. That reputation, by the data and by the numbers, that reputation has eroded. The Progressive Caucus is going to bring our working people first reputation back to the Democrats. Our former chair of this caucus, Keith Ellison, once said right before the 2016 election, if you aren't talking about growing people's paychecks, you ain't talking about nothing. And I think that's what it's going to take for us to win elections, for us to hold every part of this country across geography, across race, across ideology, and to not stand for injustice and oppression. That's what the Democratic Party needs, and that's what our country desperately needs. As the first CPC chair from a Republican-controlled state or representing one, I'm used to fighting against extremist, egocentric autocrats. I've seen firsthand how people suffer under extremist policies that do nothing to address the rent or the grocery bill or childcare. It will be our job to be defense against extreme policies from Trump and his billionaire friends, but it will also be up to the CPC to build a vision of a Democratic Party that's a working people's party. And it'll be the CPC members who make that difference in the years to come. Thank you all very much, and I'd like to turn it over to our incredible Deputy Chair, Ilhan Omar.
Thank you so much, Chairman-elect. It has been truly an honor to be part of what I would say Chairwoman Pramila Jayapal's Progressive Caucus. I came in the 2019 class, and I became the whip. It was a different Progressive Caucus that I walked into, and to have been part of the transformation and the team that worked with her really was an incredible thing to witness. The constant negotiations, the ability to listen to so many members and their concerns, to weed out the bad ideas, to extract the really good ideas, during a pandemic, to try to find a way to get us all together, to focus on what it means for us to become an agile, powerful, functioning caucus that can wield power within the Democratic Party has been really incredible, and we are just forever grateful and indebted to you. So thank you so much for your leadership, Chairwoman. So good afternoon to all of you. It is an honor to serve another term as the Deputy Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. The Progressive Caucus has always been an incredible vehicle for transformative change, justice, and movement building. Together with our leadership team, progressives have been able to shape some of the most consequential pieces of legislation in generations. It was our caucus that advocated successfully for student debt cancellation. We successfully pushed for a massive public investment, unemployment insurance, and a direct survival checks in the American Rescue Plan. We were able to successfully advocate for the most historic gun safety legislation in 30 years. And our advocacy helped shape the landmark Inflation Reduction Act, which lowered drug prices, created millions of good-paying jobs, and significantly reduced carbon emissions. Again, under Representative Jayapal's leadership, we have formed a more cohesive bloc of voting members and have been able to improve the lives of millions of Americans. I want to thank her again for her steadfast leadership and service to the progressive movement. And I know that our caucus will be in good hands with Representative Kassar as the incoming chair. In the face of far-right Republican efforts to use fear and hate to divide us, our caucus will be more important than ever. Together, we will bring the voices of millions of Americans in opposition to Donald Trump's hate-filled agenda to the forefront. Over the next term, we are going to We are not going to agonize, but organize and fight to build an inclusive movement that meets the moment. A moment rooted in justice, equality, and peace for all. I am excited to keep fighting for a future that the American people deserve. A future where families are not struggling to put food on the table. A future where young people can have a livable planet. A future where healthcare is universal. And a future where every single American can thrive. Our agenda for the next 2 years must be centered on giving the American people a clear-eyed alternative to the mega extremism. That must include an economic agenda that working people support, including higher minimum wage, an expanded child tax credit, and a fair tax code that ensures the ultra-rich are paying their fair share. We know these progressive priorities are deeply popular with the American people, and together we are going to prove good policy is good politics and build a bold progressive agenda. And with that, I want to introduce my friend and our future whip, Congressman Chuy Garcia.
Thank you very much. First, I want to say thank you to our chairperson emerita, Pramila Jayapal, for delivering for the American people during a time of crisis as she did and exemplified why we are a caucus and why we have grown so significantly, especially over the past 8 years, and why so many members of Congress want to be associated with this caucus. I am both honored and excited to assume a part of the responsibility of representing our caucus during this most crucial juncture in our modern history in this country. As many of you know, I am an immigrant from Mexico, grown up in the city of Chicago, in Chicago's community of organizing and advocacy and empowerment, and of course building diverse, progressive, multiracial, multi-ethnic coalitions, and that is what this caucus is all about. Many of us in the coming days and years will face a moment when the communities and constituencies that we represent will be uniquely targeted by one or more horrible initiatives of the administration. Mark my words. And in those moments, we will need to stand strong, to speak as one in defense of our own and each other's most vulnerable communities. And that strength comes not only from our diversity as a caucus, but from CPC's core policies. You've heard the prior speakers talk about them, but they include unrigging the economy so it works for all, especially working people. It means investing in our care economy for children and for the elderly and everyone in between. It means making wealthy individuals and corporations pay their fair share and ensuring that we don't get into forever wars wherever possible across the globe, and addressing health care and housing affordability. These policies are hugely popular with the American public across the political spectrum. So as we confront MAGA's empty promises to working people, the CPC has to make and take the opportunity to fight fake populism with real, popular, and people-centered platforms our caucus represents and supports. I look forward to getting started on the work. Let's go to work for the American people. I would like to next call on our chairperson emerita, to introduce our special guest. Yes.
Special guest? Are you kidding?
This is Jayapal to introduce Barbara, so I don't know.
Listen, I am Barbara Lee. I love, now welcome to the OG Club, which is not original genius, y'all. It's original gangster. Let me just say, too, Congressman Kassar, I am so proud of you. Congratulations. And I have to think of and lift up Sheila Jackson Lee today, who was a very active member of this Progressive Caucus, who was so proud that you were able to break through in Texas and come here today. And I know Sheila is proud and looking down and wishing you well. So thank you so much. Let me just say first a couple of things as I stand here listening and witnessing this passing of the baton. My very first meeting when I came to Congress in 1998 was with Bernie Sanders and Paul Wellstone, founders of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Paul was the only member of the Senate in the Progressive Caucus, and there were only a few members of the House. And what we talked about during that very first meeting is how we could work to make the Progressive Caucus a multiracial caucus. And here now, Pramila, I am so proud. And this is a bookend moment for me also, coming full circle, to see this Progressive Caucus. And what Bernie and Paul and myself talked about it was we had to figure this out because we knew that progressives had to embrace issues of diversity and racial equity and gender equity, as well as economic justice and economic equity. And so I just have to say how proud I am of all of you, and to our new chair, Emerita. She, I have been in meetings with her with the president, and I just have to say her strength and her clarity of purpose and her representation is something to behold. You all know her publicly. I know her in these meetings where it's sometimes really tough meetings, but she holds the line, and she holds the line on behalf of the American people because the progressive agenda is the American agenda. And, you know, when people ask me what does progressive mean, I say, look, if feeding hungry children means I'm a progressive, yes, I'm a progressive. If fighting for affordable housing, for a living wage, for health care means you're a progressive, yes, I'm really proud to be a progressive. And we could go on and on and on. And Chair Emerita, soon to be, Jayapal, always has reflected not only those values, but those policies, both on the inside and on the outside. And I'll always remember coming to her and talking about, look, you know, the Progressive Caucus has got to begin to use the P word. And so what do you mean the P word? Poverty and peace. Come on. Right? And so you can... We had finally Bishop Barber come talking about low-income people, people who are fighting just to survive. So working families, working people, poor people, low-income people, the Progressive Caucus has embraced as part of our overall progressive agenda, whereas before you didn't hear people talking about poor people or people living below the poverty line. Peace and security. The task force, which I'm proud to chair, the Task Force on Peace and Security. The Progressive Caucus under Chairwoman Emerita Jayapal has embraced issues around looking at our military budget and how we begin to put more resources into development and diplomacy and humanitarian assistance and reduce this obscene military budget, which has flunked its 7th audit, incidentally. and so under her leadership, this caucus has grown, but also it's become the voice of the American people. And so I just have to say how proud I am today to be here at this bookend part of my career here in Congress, and to say that I know we're in good hands. Yes. I know that you all are going to be not only the resistance movement inside, but also be the members of Congress who are going to push our agenda forward in spite of who's in the White House. Because this is a moment where we know that our democracy is at risk, we know that our freedoms are at risk, and we know that we have to play offense and defense at the same time. And so, Congressman, you have a big job ahead of you, but Congresswoman Emerita has paved the way for us to rise to the occasion and to move our movement forward, embracing economic justice, as well as what Congresswoman Jayapal has heard the cries of from people around the country that racial justice and racial equity is part of a progressive agenda. Thank you again.
Thank you all very much. And I think we have our first question from CNN. And if not, then we'll move on to others. Okay. Any questions from somebody other than CNN? Go ahead.
Can you talk a bit about some of the tactics or mechanics that you plan to use in order to, when you do push back on the Trump administration and also the Republican majority?
Ask them to identify themselves.
Yeah. And will you let everybody know which outlet you're from? I know, but
Yeah,
they don't.
I can try with the Texas.
Yeah. Thank you, Matthew. We know that House Republicans have an extremely thin majority. And so our goal will be not only to have the Progressive Caucus try to block Trump's tax break handouts to his billionaire friends, but our goal will be to hold the entire Democratic caucus together because the Progressive Caucus cannot get out there first and organize all of our Democratic colleagues to unanimously oppose those billionaire tax breaks, for example. And then it'll be up to the Republicans to either vote unanimously to give billionaires a tax break when they said they were the party of working people and pay the political cost for it, or we can sink those billionaire tax breaks. But either way, I think our job will be to not only unify our caucus, but unify the Democratic caucus around what working people actually want. Go ahead.
Thank you. Michael Jones, Once Upon a Hill. So much of the work that you were able to do in the 117th and 18th Congress was through the executive action agenda that y'all put forward. Obviously, that was working with the Democratic president. You will be answering with the unified Republican government. How are you going to find ways to enact some of those policy provisions that may be outside of the legislative process that you all were able to do through the executive branch with Trump 2.0?
We'll be working hard to protect many of the executive action victories we had under the Biden administration because the Progressive Caucus executive action agenda was a popular agenda, making sure that workers don't get screwed out of their overtime pay, changing our student debt system so that people aren't ultimately paying, for decades, student debt that they should have already been able to pay off. And so we'll be raising our voices and making it very difficult for the Trump administration to undo many of our wins. If you look at during the last Trump administration, there were battles we fought and battles that Democrats fought both in D.C. and across the country that we won by, for example, saving the Affordable Care Act, and then battles that it may look like we lost, for example, when the Trump tax scam was passed. But if you look at Trump's approval ratings during his first term, his approval ratings went into the toilet when he passed the tax scam. That wasn't just because it was a billionaire handout, but it was because members of Congress worked with community groups to really make sure that the country knew what Trump was really up to, because we can expect that Trump will keep on saying he's doing one thing and then do the exact opposite when he's in office. Go ahead.
We've seen
And will you tell us, both yourself and ignorant?
Ryan Schmelz, Fox News Radio.
Yeah.
We've seen some Democrats express interest in working with DOJ on ways to cut government waste or make government more effective. Do you see places that you can work with DOJ to make government more efficient?
Well, progressives have always been for efficient use of our tax dollars. Unfortunately, Elon Musk has largely proven himself to be an efficient liar and self-serving plutocrat. And so I don't have high hopes for him having anything other than pretty awful ideas. But progressives are always willing to vote for and champion good ideas. Many of us here have amendments and bills, for example, for making sure that our defense budget is appropriate and rerouted to make sure that it's actually, make sure that the Pentagon someday could pass an audit, make sure that we actually invest in our communities instead of needless war. But I, at least speaking for myself, having experience with Elon Musk in Texas, is that he tends to talk a lot, but he doesn't really seem to know very much. Go ahead.
Charles Hillier with Dispatch. Could you speak a little more about your diagnosis as to why Democrats had such an underwhelming performance in the elections last month?
Of course, we can make sure we take a look eventually at, all of the, when the voter file fully comes out, we'll make sure we go and take a really deep dive. But broadly, you might come and think, if you went to the election of the centrist caucus election, for them to say we need to run more center, that you come to the progressive caucus chair and see, maybe I come and say we need to be more progressive. But to be honest, right, people could point to centrist members of Congress that ran ahead of the vice president, but you could also point to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's election, my own election, where we also ran ahead of the vice president. So I'm not here to argue that we necessarily need to run left or right, but rather that we need to run right at the issues of working people. That working people, everyday people, want to hear from leaders that actually motivate them to get to the polls in the first place. And second, many of the voters that I've spoken to in places like Texas that swap their votes from Biden to Trump or were considering doing so is because they want to hear from a more authentic Democratic Party that isn't beholden to any other interest other than working people's interests. And I think that has less to do with any particular candidate and more to do with the definition of who we are as Democrats. And I think the Progressive Caucus has been working for a really long time, and we'll triple down our efforts right now to make the Democratic Party connect with working class voters first. Go ahead.
Hi. Rena Diamante with From News. Can you just speak to, I think I've heard you say that it's important to not necessarily campaign an arm's length away from where the American people are currently at. Can you just clarify what you mean by that? And then second, what does your experience with working and organizing in Texas, how does that prepare you for the incoming administration and the Republican majority?
I'll take the second part first. In the last Trump administration, Governor Abbott worked with the Trump administration to threaten to withhold dollars that we needed for people's health care and for people's streets if local governments didn't work to divert their own dollars away from public safety over towards things like deportation of innocent immigrant families. And so we could expect those tactics and worse. And so I know how bad the Trump administration can really be on issues of public safety, on issues of health care, and how they try to coerce local governments into also doing the wrong thing. And so I've seen this before, and we're prepared this time to tackle it in round two. To your first question about making sure that we're leading, but making sure that we stay connected with our communities, I think it's so important to make sure that the Democratic Party holds people across ideology, holds on to the center of this country without leaving people behind. And there's a real way that I think it is that we can where we can do that. We don't have to. We have to make sure that we lean in on, as a party, those issues like the progressive issues on the economy, where we have 70 and 80% of voters agreeing with us. We should be able to try to persuade people and move people on issues where maybe we don't have 50% support in the country yet, and instead work on that kind of persuasion and bringing people along. Look at the issue of gay marriage, for example. Right? Barack Obama, in his first election for president, wouldn't come out, for example, for gay marriage, but the Democrats worked on moving the country on that issue so that at this point it is overwhelmingly popular. So I think we need to be able to differentiate, honestly, between those issues where we have the overwhelming majority of the country with us, and we should fully lean in on those issues, and then those issues where Republicans have dominated the narrative on things like the right to asylum, and we need to build our own narrative and recognize that we've got to move people fully back into our camp on issues like immigration if we ever want to get to a comprehensive and humane immigration solution. All right. Thank you guys very much.